Welcome to the Tech Today podcast. It's your host, John Mayetta. So you may have seen this AI scaling chart before, which sort of depicts how large language models scale, or how neural models scale. And it simply shows that as you throw more compute, i.e. more resources at a large language model, I want to talk about large language models specifically today, the error rate goes down, productivity goes up. And the one thing you typically don't see with these AI scaling charts is the associated cost. More compute means more capital requirement. And so if today we have billion-dollar models in process by the frontier model developers, Anthropic, Google, OpenAI, and if the pace of scaling and the pace of development continues, the current pace, that means that by 2026, we'll be looking at roughly a $10 billion large language model. And approximately a year forward, 2027-ish, we'll be looking at a $100 billion large language model. Carry the same logic forward, by 2028, you're talking about a $1 trillion large language model. So the question starts to become, who's going to pay for the models? 100 billion, you could argue, whether you're Microsoft, Apple, Google, between balance sheet cash from operations, perhaps issuing some stock, you get to 100 billion. A trillion is a little bit of a bigger ask, but at some point you have to ask, a CEO, what's sort of the payback period? How long is it going to take for me to generate 100 billion or a trillion of generative AI-related revenue? Or, I would want to define payback by profits or cash flow. So how long is it going to take to generate 100 billion or $1 trillion of Gen AI-related operating income or Gen AI-related operating cash flow? All right, so capital starts to become a constraint. And so I think the way large language models are going to play out, Gen AI, the way it's going to play out from at the model layer, the infrastructure layer, is that the frontier developers, the frontier model builders, so Anthropic, Google, OpenAI, they're going to start to partner, and some of this has already started to happen, but they'll partner with some of the largest companies from different industries. So you may have, for example, Google partner with the 2 or 3 largest pharmaceutical companies, and they'll work to develop, to train a large language model specific to that industry, to that domain. Right? So drug discovery, the model would be trained with a combination of publicly available data, research papers and such, along with proprietary data, enterprise data from those large pharmaceutical companies. Right? So now you'll have proprietary data specific to that industry training these models. And then that goes toward developing a baseline model for that industry. And then those companies and other third parties could develop smaller language models that would sit on top of that baseline model and be used for very specific commercial use cases to power various services and software applications. And in doing it that way, those smaller models, there'll be sort of a natural selection process, if you will, whereby there's a commercial need to deliver a service or product. Sort of a more narrow, more defined niche need. And then the cost associated with building an app on top of one of those smaller models is much less, as is the cost associated with building those smaller models. And so to me, that type of scenario just makes much more commercial sense than building these ever larger monolithic LLMs, particularly when you have some of these guys that have been in the press over the past couple of weeks that have left OpenAI and said, the rate of improvement is starting to slow a little bit between the current gen Orion / GPT-5 and its improvement over GPT-4 isn't quite the same level of improvement that we saw with GPT-4 over GPT-3. At some point, you start to hit diminishing returns, and even if you don't, capital requirements are going to throw a roadblock at these large frontier LLMs. And I think smaller models are just going to become commonplace, will permeate various industries, and will make a heck of a lot more economic sense than the current monolithic LLM approach. That's all for now. See you next time.